Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Handling Imposter Feelings digital event. My name is Lucia, and I'm an events manager at CMI. We should be handing over to Marie to begin the session. If you have any questions during the event, you can ask them using the live chat box on the right of your screen, and we shall answer as many as we can. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared for those who book to attend. It will also be available on the CMI website and the CMI YouTube channel. Now over to Marie, Managing Director at Professional Development Training. Enjoy the session.
Thanks, Lucia. Hi there, my name is Marie Helen-Mead. I'm an executive coach and a management development consultant. I work with senior leaders and managers across a range of industries and specialise in coaching women in management roles, for those already at senior level and for those who are aspiring to more senior leadership roles. I also deliver in-house workshops and speak at events on sort of general leadership and personal development topics, including today's session, Handling Imposter Feelings. So last week I was chatting with a friend who asked me how work was going, and I explained that I was giving this talk on Monday on imposter feelings. And she said, well, what exactly are imposter feelings? What's that all about? When I explained that it's a faulty belief which makes us doubt ourselves and wait to be caught out and feel that the fear that we are likely to be caught out, her immediate reaction was, oh my God, I've got that. And I think that's really common when you actually talk about imposter feelings, because whether we've admitted it out loud before or not, you know, the chances are that most of us have had times in our career where we've felt out of our depth and we've worried that those around us might realise that, you know, we're not as good as they thought, and we're concerned that we might be found out. And the reason I know this, well, research suggests that up to 70% of us have had these types of feelings at certain points in our career. And the fact that you've joined this session today would suggest that you also struggle with how to handle those feelings. For some people, these concerns about not being as good as others might think they are something that as we grow more experienced, we're able to manage and we're able to control those things. But for others of us, this self-doubt never really completely goes away. And our ability to maintain a positive self-image is something that we often struggle with throughout our entire careers. So today's session then will hopefully help you build your understanding of exactly what is this thing called imposter syndrome. It'll identify situations which may trigger imposter feelings so that you can identify any situations in the workplace where, you know, those things are likely to crop up. We'll help you recognise how imposter symptoms manifest themselves in the workplace. So what tend to be the behaviours or traits that we might display to others and see ourselves implementing at work. And finally, we'll go through some techniques for handling those feelings more effectively when they actually arise. So what is it and where did it come from? Well, first described in the 1970s, imposter phenomenon was actually the name given by two clinical psychologists, Drs. Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, whose research involved interviewing 162 women, and they came up with one similarity which was sort of predominant, and that is that all of these individuals lacked an internal sense of their own success and couldn't understand or appreciate their own achievements. And this meant that they basically dismissed their achievements, were highly self-critical, and lived in fear, waiting for somebody to effectively find them out and point out that they were there fraudulently. So imposter phenomenon presents itself as a condition in which at certain times and in certain situations we experience an uncomfortable feeling that the success we've had has only been achieved, we've only reached that success either by mistake, by pure luck or complete chance. And certainly as an imposter, we feel that we are there fraudulently and that we are fakes. Imposter syndrome makes us question our own capability and our own intelligence. and makes us feel that we've somehow fluked our way into the success that we've actually achieved. Even if you've worked really hard to get there, imposter feelings and imposter syndrome can undermine that sense of self-belief. But imposter feelings are recognised as being feeling irrationally insecure. And I'm going to say that again because it's so important. It's an irrational insecurity. The fact is that often evidence to the contrary is all around us, to show that you are worthy and you have achieved these things off your own back. But unfortunately, it's our inability to see that and recognise it that causes the imposterism. So if you've ever caught yourself thinking, I'm not sure how I managed to get here, it's probably more through luck than judgment, oh my goodness, somebody is going to find me out, they're going to realise that I'm not as good as they think, then welcome to the Imposter Club. And rest assured that you're actually in the company of many famous individuals, including from top left clockwise then. We've got Tom Hanks, Emma Watson, Michelle Obama, Kate Winslet, Meryl Streep, Albert Einstein, Serena Williams, and Amy Schumer. And all of these people have had moments where they worried that they're just not good enough, because essentially that is the faulty thinking that underpins imposter feelings. So let's just rewind for a second. We're talking about people here like Meryl Streep, 3-time Oscar winner with 21 nominations behind her, who famously said of taking on new projects, you think, why would anyone want to see me again in a movie? And I don't know how to act anyway, so why am I doing this? And Serena Williams, 23 Grand Slams she's won and essentially revolutionised women's tennis with her powerful style of play. And then finally, we've got something like Tom Hanks, again, one of the most popular and recognisable film stars in the world and regarded as an American cultural icon. Now, the trouble is, I'm sure you'll appreciate that when imposter feelings strike, it's not about how many qualifications or indeed Oscars that you've got. It's not about how many successful performance reviews you've had. It's not about how many qualifications generally that you've undertaken. In fact, there's lots of people out there who will consider you to be talented and brilliant, but unfortunately, you're not one of them. The thing is, we can look at these individuals and by most people's standards, we would consider them to be successful. And ironically, the same is also true of you. By most people's standards, the chances are that you are also viewed as successful. You just don't necessarily see yourself in the same light. And often, until we're sharing these feelings with someone else, we don't necessarily realise how widespread these imposter feelings tend to be. We can feel surprised to hear that others whom we consider to be successful also have these self-doubts. And I promise you, in exactly the same way, other people will look at you and will be amazed that you, of all people, have this sense of self-doubts. So I'm going to suggest that we view our experience of imposter feelings on a continuum. On the left-hand side, we can talk about having occasional self-doubts and worry and anxieties. And right up the spectrum to the right-hand side, where there may be a full-blown fear of being found out. So on the one hand, the impact can be quite subtle, and only on certain occasions, certain situations will imposter feelings rear their ugly head and give us self-doubt and worry and anxiety. And at the other extreme, we have a far more constant undermining sense of something eating away at us, which is exhausting, wearing, and can have a very negative effect on our lives. So you may look at this continuum and think, okay, well, maybe you're in the middle somewhere. Maybe you're at one end or the other. Maybe you flit between the two extremes. And it's great if you can recognise where you might be on this continuum at different times and at different points. Because actually recognising that you are prone to imposter feelings is part and parcel of the first step in starting to address those feelings. And what are the negative impacts of these? Well, certainly a nagging sense of inferiority. If we live on this continuum, there's going to be a sense of not feeling good enough, maybe a feeling of living on the edge. Stress and anxiety may also be part and parcel of that. High levels of self-criticism, focusing on the negatives rather than on the positives. So perhaps a lot of, I wish I had said this, or I should have said that, or I should have done this, and berating ourselves for having failed to live up to what we feel are our expectations. Certainly a sense of a fear of failing, which can often lead us to playing it safe and not putting our hands up or jumping into something new, for fear of what might potentially go wrong, or that we might be spotted as a fake. And then actually when we do build up the courage to do that, then rather than enjoying the prospect of a challenge, then often what we tend to see instead is an impending sense of doom, and an increased amount of pressure that, oh my goodness, we really have got to get this right. Feeling unsatisfied with certain aspects of your career or of your achievements can certainly lead to dips in self-image, and that's going to have a knock-on effect at certain points in our beliefs about ourselves and our confidence levels. So I wonder how many of these resonate with you on a personal level. It may not be all of them, and some of these may be stronger feelings for you or stronger impacts than others on them. But I think it's important to stop and just get our heads around the negative impact of the long-term effects of imposter feelings. Because if I just presented you with this slide, with just this list of approaches, then and asked you how, what would be the knock-on effect that you think this would have, how it might affect your career, and I'm pretty sure that you could quite swiftly come up with the fact that, bouts of low self-confidence, it would tend to be for us to be focusing on our weaknesses rather than our strengths, constant berating ourselves for not being as good as we feel we should be, not taking advantage of opportunities, or maybe even underestimating our true contribution, what you already are contributing to the team and the department. Feelings that you should have maybe achieved more, perhaps as a parent, as a partner, as a friend, as a manager. The problem is that these are really high, long-term negative prices to pay, and imposter feelings are based on limited or negative self-beliefs. So the cost of holding on to these is going to be expensive for all of us on a personal level. In fact, if you're keen to challenge and address some of the underlying limiting beliefs that underpin imposter feelings, then associating a cost, what's going to be the cost that you pay for not challenging and changing these feelings, is one of it's a good starting point from which to progress and to move forwards. Okay, so when and where do imposter feelings tend to strike? Well, absolutely, without doubt, in the workplace, especially if you work in an environment that's very competitive, or one where outputs or tasks or goals or KPIs or competencies are constantly measured or adhered to. That's certainly going to have occasions where our imposter feelings can take place. Certainly in times of transition, changes in our employment, moving companies or changing careers. And I'm sure that in the last 14 months, we've all undergone so many different changes that the transitions themselves can be enough to just trigger more imposter feelings. Taking on new roles or promotions, of course, as you're the new person, or stepping into something new, that can exacerbate those self-doubts. And actually, so can taking on stretch projects or assignments. In fact, anything that takes you above and beyond your usual skills and capabilities, can certainly make us question ourselves. Anytime you're taking on additional responsibilities can also trigger that kind of self-doubt. And realistically, anytime that you're outside of your comfort zone, can certainly make you feel unsure about yourself and uncertain. Additionally, whenever you feel that you're the odd one out from the group that you're with, So whether that's for any reason, age, gender, race, this tends to magnify our feelings of being an outsider and exacerbates imposter thoughts. And finally, let's not forget that for many of us, our work-life balance may be the area that tends to throw up this imposterism. Sometimes outside of work, imposter feelings hit us when we feel that we're somehow failing to get that balance right. So whether that's not being as good as we want to be as a parent, or as a sibling, or even as the child we feel our parents want or need us to be. Okay, what I'd like to do is just pause at this moment for you to note down when and where imposter feelings tend to strike you. Feel free to add it into the comments box if you'd like to do it at this stage to see whether these are common to many of us. Think about the circumstances that you tend to find yourselves in at that point and whether they match any of the situations listed here. Okay, let's have tip 1. I think it's really important to recognise that we all feel uncertain at times, and it is completely normal to feel that way and even a little anxious, if you're pushing yourself outside of your normal comfort zone. We are only human after all, and feeling on edge in some of the situations that we've just talked about is completely natural. The problem is when imposter feelings and imposter beliefs strike, they tend to magnify what are essentially normal feelings and make us feel that they're not normal, but they absolutely are. If you're outside of your comfort zone, the chances are you are more likely to feel uncertain and unsure. The thing is, if a friend told you that they were anxious and nervous about, let's say, stepping into a new role, your instinctive reaction is likely to be to show them some compassion. You'd reassure them, you'd highlight their strengths, you'd encourage them to be positive. And if you can see the logic in that, then I'm hoping that you can also see the logic in showing the same sort of compassion to yourself when you're feeling unsure, uncertain, and anxious. One of the most effective ways to start addressing imposter feelings is to catch the imposter thoughts as they arise. So stopping and recognizing that it's just the inner critic, it's the devil on your shoulder whispering in your ear, that will help you to show a little bit more self-compassion. Recognize that, it's not your true voice. It's just there to criticize and to highlight your fears. It makes you doubt yourself and makes you feel insecure, but feelings are not facts. Feelings are definitely not facts. And it doesn't mean that you are those things. Try to reframe that negative voice into positive words, the same way that you would offer positive compassion to a friend. Okay, let's have a look at some of the giveaway symptoms of imposter feelings and imposter syndrome in the workplace, and let's see if any of these ring true for you personally. So, overworking, putting in long hours, working during weekends, a tendency to put in extreme efforts means that trying to cope with imposter feelings often means we'll do anything to hide them. So it makes sense to work and then maybe work some more just to make sure that what you're producing is of such supreme quality that it leaves no opportunity for fault or for anybody to criticize or to find you or your work standards to be lacking. Couple this with an obsession over small details, and what we tend to fall into is the perfectionist trap, pressurizing ourselves to get everything so spot on in a desperate attempt to avoid anyone finding fault, agonizing over the smallest flaws, when in actual fact, nobody is going to probably judge you anything like as harshly as you are more inclined to judge yourself. But certainly agonizing over small flaws means that we over magnify slight errors, and that can lead us to taking criticism, even constructive criticism, so much to heart that we find it soul-destroying. And if we align our whole sense of self to the task at hand, then we line ourselves up for the fact that if we don't reach these high standards, then we'll automatically feel an impending sense of doom. And in order to avoid feeling that we're not being good enough, we often set ourselves superhuman standards. So whether that's super parenting standards, super manager standards, super partner standards, but either way, the chances are that all of these are unsustainably high and therefore unrealistic expectations that just create additional unfounded and unsustainable pressure on ourselves. So things like reading and rereading emails before you're comfortable enough to press send. You might be taking twice as long to get a report written because you're checking it and then double checking and then triple checking it. Agreeing impossible deadlines on workloads for fear of letting people down, which again puts us under such immense pressure to deliver. How difficult that becomes for us as individuals to just try and live up to our own expectations of ourselves, let alone what anybody else we think expects from us. Okay, so let's have a look at a couple more tips for how we might be able to counter some of these things. I think one thing we can do is to start saying no more often. Now, I'm not suggesting that we reject every request for assistance here, but what I am saying is there's no need to just say yes and agree to something purely because we don't want to disappoint somebody. In fact, I'm going to suggest that what we need to be doing is managing someone else's expectations up front, discussing things like time frames and negotiating what you can and can't do, so that allows you to retain some control over what's going on. Putting yourself under immense pressure it's often not necessary. Deadlines are often flexible and workload is often negotiable. But we have got to start that conversation up front, and actually be confident enough to raise those issues at the start rather than just immediately jumping in and piling the pressure on ourselves. I think it's also, moving to the second point here, I think it's also time to accept that very rarely in our lives does absolutely everything have to be done to perfectionist standards. In fact, I'm going to suggest that we stop treating everything as critical, because do you know what? It can't all be critical. So on that basis, we need to be more discerning about where our time and our effort and our energies go, and actually kind of thinking about where your focus is going to be. Now, we can often be our own worst enemy when it comes to imposter feelings, and I'm going to highlight here some self-sabotaging traits and behaviours for you to really have a look at and decide whether any of these resonate or are reflected in the way you are in the workplace. So people suffering with imposter feelings tend to avoid asking for help, preferring to clock up those hours working alone rather than have anyone suspect that they're not capable. But failing to delegate means adding to the work pressure for us as individuals and putting yourself under immense personal pressure to deliver. And this lone wolf tendency keeps that unrelenting pressure upon us for way too long, and it's unsustainable. All achievers, which generally speaking, those suffering with imposter feelings tend to be achievement oriented. All achievers want to do their best, but when we're in imposter mode, we just find it very easy to discount and dismiss our own achievements. But by constantly discounting what you've managed to achieve, what you're doing is failing to recognize how brilliant something is that you have actually completed and done. And in doing that, we're creating some sort of ongoing vicious circle for ourselves. We work really hard at getting something done, we achieve it, somebody praises us, and then we discount that praise because for some reason we don't feel we've lived up to expectations, and we start the whole cycle again. We take things way too personally, and we end up with a driving feeling that we need to be experts at everything to avoid giving any room for criticism. And this feeling that we must master everything that we touch, again, just adds to the amount of pressure and the amount of self-criticism that we are likely to get going and to have firing away in our brains. And this internalizing of what we see as any failure, sometimes means that we carry negative comments like criticism, even constructive criticism or feedback. We carry those with us for way too long and take it way too personally. I mean, to the point that sometimes, it's not just weeks or months, but it can be years that we take these comments with us, and they keep rearing their ugly heads and making us doubt ourselves throughout our careers. So what can we do to handle some of these tendencies? Well, first of all, let's ask for help more. You haven't got to do it all on your own. Let's ask for help. Let's not be afraid to collaborate with others. Asking for help, and I'm saying this directly to all of you who are suffering with imposter feelings, asking for help is not a sign of weakness. Okay? The ability to collaborate and to delegate, in fact, are key leadership skills. Learn them and use them. Next, let's start owning those achievements. If somebody praises you and says you've done a good job, graciously accept the praise and enjoy the moments when you've completed something rather than just discounting it and on to the next thing. In fact, I'd encourage you to relish the moment when you've completed a task and enjoy that time of a project well completed, rather than just feeling that overriding sense of relief that it's over. And finally, tip 6, let's remove some of this inherent pressure to be an expert in everything. None of us can know everything about every subject, and actually that's okay, because stepping into uncharted territory is surely a positive move, taking you from your comfort zone into a learning zone. And it's very natural once you're in a learning zone to feel unsure and uncertain. In fact, congratulate yourself for having the confidence to be stepping into uncharted waters. The fact is that embracing a growth mindset and accepting that we're always moving forward is going to build your adaptability and your agility, which are going to be key skills for the 21st century. So we've looked at what imposter syndrome is. We've looked at some of the situations that trigger it and some of the behaviours and traits in the workplace that you may see manifesting in you and that you may automatically be implementing it in the workplace. I'd like to leave you though with some thoughts to take away. At the point that those imposter feelings and imposter thoughts start echoing in your mind and that little voice starts whispering in your ear, I want to remind you that it's not you that's gone awry. It is just your thought process and your feelings. It's very easy to think that you're the only one with these self-doubts, but research definitely suggests otherwise, as to the number of people that are on this session today. I want to remind you that other people are just not more talented or capable than you. All they do is that they think differently. So maybe they've learned and managed to tame the inner critic, but all they're doing is thinking differently. They are definitely not more capable, intelligent, or competent than you are. And of course, if you're serious about minimizing your imposter feelings, then challenging that inner voice, challenging those thoughts and feelings is what's going to help change your behavior. Not letting it lie, keeping that when that voice when you hear that voice on your shoulder, actually stopping, not just listening to it, but actually trying to counter it with something more positive. So I'm hoping that we've scratched the surface for you, really, in terms of giving you some food for thought here. If you'd like to look at this on a more personal level, whether that's through one-to-one coaching or for your team or your department as in an in-house workshop, then please do get in touch. My website details are there, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn and we can have conversations on that at that point. Okay, Lucia, I'd like to hand back to you now.
Thank you very much, Marie. And thank you to those of you who submitted your questions in advance. We start with a question from Lauren. Lauren would like to know, how do you gain confidence to assert yourself when being the generational and gender minority in your management staff? I'm Generation Z, they're all male baby boomers.
Okay, so Lauren has got two trigger factors going on in that scenario. So from an age perspective and from a gender perspective, then it would automatically imply that there's a tendency to think of herself as an outsider. And of course that can certainly trigger imposter feelings and result in a feeling of self-doubt and not being able to be confident enough. But there's a couple of things here. I think the first thing is, Lauren needs to be congratulating herself about the fact that she has done this in spite of being an outsider, and what she's achieved needs to be enjoyed and reflected on and appreciated as a success. And the second thing is, if it's about asserting a more confident approach with this fellow group of managers, then I don't think there is a need for us to go in all guns blazing and suddenly, change absolutely everything about the way that you've worked with this team in the past. In fact, I'd suggest that doing it step by step, doing small changes, whether that's speaking up at meetings or making your voice heard or just being a bit more forthcoming and volunteering for things. But actually taking small steps will not only be a more comfortable way of stepping into a more confident approach, but I think also if there are imposter feelings and imposter thoughts at play, then taking small steps allows you to challenge that inner critic, challenge the voice that's suggesting that you can't do something, and provide evidence that actually you can do it. And then we start going, rather than a negative downward spiral, then we start changing it and become more into the positive upward spiral of moving forwards. Okay.
Thank you. Next question is from Bob. How, in your experience, does imposter syndrome vary during and into the process of setting up in self-employment?
Right. Okay. So I'm guessing that this has probably affected a lot of people in the last year and a bit because of the amount of people who have moved from the private or public sector and going into self-employment. And again, outside of any pre-existing comfort zone, we are likely to suffer imposter feelings. They're likely to be triggered by the very fact that you're outside of what is your norm. So I think that in itself, it would mean that even if you haven't had an awful lot of imposter feelings and imposter thoughts beforehand, jumping into self-employment is going to trigger a lot of those self-doubts and anxieties. So first of all, outside of your comfort zone, yes, you probably are going to feel some of those doubts. Secondly, moving into self-employment, I think often we have in our minds goals or targets or what we want to achieve. And again, that coupled with the fact that you're outside a comfort zone can actually just put increased pressure on you to feel that you've got to justify yourself, maybe only even to yourself, but that in itself can cause more imposter feelings. I think there's a couple of things from Bob's perspective. I think the first thing is, accept that if we're outside of our comfort zone, we are learning, and that's a good place to be. And part of the way of coping with that might be to start reflecting on, okay, what have I learned this week? What have I learned today? What have I learned about the way that I can keep this business moving forward this week? And actually understanding that part of the process of moving into self-employment is about learning a whole new world and a whole new way of working.
Okay. Great. The next question is a bit long, but we thought it was interesting, so I really owe it to you. It's from Holtepels. Thank you, Holtepels. Whenever I started a new position within a firm and in a new company, I felt happy and had the sense of achievement. But then after about 2-3 weeks, I felt like an imposter. I can't put my finger around why. I simply feel it and become anxious. I've now been in my current position for a bit under a year, and I've received great feedback from all team members, and I achieve a lot in the short hours I am at the company. Recently, we had a new addition to the team, and despite us all being working from home, my feelings of being an imposter rose to a level I've not experienced before. The question is this a normal way to feel? I'm very happy with the job and the position and my tasks, and I feel as a member of the team. Thank you.
Right, okay. Yeah, that is a long question. There's a lot of different things going on in there, but it certainly sounds to me that like there's a lot of different transitions that have been made. So, starting off at a new organization, you go in as the new person, and that creates, scope for you to feel like you're an outsider until you've settled. Working from home has caused a lot of imposter feelings for a lot of people, purely because the working in isolation can trigger self-doubts, and that can manifest in imposter feelings. And then I think on top of that one, from that particular perspective, the addition of somebody else new into the mix may also be part of that trigger for imposter feelings, because if you work in a competitive environment, or if your natural instinct is to see other people as competitors as opposed to necessarily team members and collaborators, then that also can contribute to imposter feelings. So I think there's a few different things there which may all be contributing to that feeling that, I feel self-doubt, anxiety, and concern about what I'm doing. But the other thing I heard in that question was the fact that, this person has had positive feedback already about what they have done. And I think what's happening there is that that's being discounted and left to the side, when actually the fact is that they've done really well in their role. They've been told that for the 12 months what they've achieved is great, and they need to enjoy and recognise that actually they are doing well. And that balance of recognising what they are doing well, but also recognising all of these different triggers and digging a bit deeper to work out why are these triggers resonating so profoundly with them as an individual, that will allow them to, to get to grips with it a little bit more. I would certainly suggest, if somebody's working from home, communicating more, collaborating more with people, and actually just talking about how you're feeling may well give you a route to eliminating some of those feelings of isolation.
Okay, next question is from Ismael. Ismael would like to know, how can we explain and communicate to our loved ones what types of feelings we're going through?
Right. So what I often find when I'm coaching people is that when people mention imposter feelings to family or friends, whilst we are likely to get a positive, oh no, you're doing really well, that sort of reassurance, it's often quite difficult for family and friends to really recognise the depth of what you're feeling. And it can actually get to the point where they so don't recognise those feelings with the person they know you to be, that they can't necessarily provide the ear that you need, or the sounding board that you need, to be able to reflect and dig a bit deeper on those emotions. So I'm a great believer that if you can actually discuss these sort of imposter feelings, but with others who also have take on it. So it's not necessarily as useful to run it past your family and friends as it is to discuss it with other people in the workplace who may also have these sorts of similar feelings. Or, if you've got a coach or a mentor, or if you've got a particularly receptive line manager, then actually discussing with them how you're feeling may land and may be heard more effectively than actually with somebody who knows you better from an outside perspective.
Great. We're going to move on to a few questions from the live chat. Okay. The first question is from Shouna. So Shouna would like to know, how do you tell the difference between the fear of imposter syndrome and a genuine knowledge gap that needs to be addressed?
Okay, how do you tell between the fear and the general knowledge gap? Okay. Part of me feels that these go a little bit hand in hand anyway, because if you're outside your comfort zone, you are going to feel more fear. But when you're in the learning zone, which is what you're likely to be, having moved out of your norm, then learning something and taking on new information and new skills and new capabilities is part and parcel of that. And what I don't want to do is suggest to you that actually, you don't need to learn anything. And there is a balance there between recognizing that is the fear a genuine underlying, and it's underpinned by a belief that's very negative and limiting, or is it because you're actually just learning something new and that's a natural fear? And I think that's probably the distinction. Is it natural fear caused by the fact that you are in uncharted territory, or is there something more fundamental and more profound underlying that, which is more reflective of your true limiting self-beliefs?
Great. Next question is from Tiny Tat. Could you talk about how to tolerate failures and negative responses in ways that not make the imposter feelings worse? So how to tolerate failures and negative responses in ways that do not make the imposter feeling worse.
How to tolerate negative, I'm sorry, can you just repeat that again, Lucia?
Yeah, sure. Could you talk about how to tolerate failures and negative responses in ways that do not make imposter feeling worse? So if perhaps you get a negative comment,
yeah, how do you not take that to heart? How do you not take that to just make things worse? Okay. Let's have a think. If we listen to the inner critic will only point out your failings, will only point out your weaknesses, and that voice is there to highlight all the things that you're potentially doing wrong. And what we really need to do, and I guess I can't emphasize this enough really, is that as you catch that thought about, oh my gosh, you failed, or that feedback has been really negative, as you catch that entering in your mind, that's the point at which you really need to stop and think, okay, what's the logic behind this? Because all we're doing at that point is starting to feel negative, and that's starting to make our imposter feelings worse. But actually, it is recognizing that actually it's just a trigger. It's just an emotional trigger of our feelings. And what we need to be talking about then is actually, what have you learned from this apparent failure, this apparent thing going wrong, and trying to adjust it and reframe it so that it's what you can learn from this and what you can take from this and move forward, as opposed to letting it resonate in your head and sit there as a negative voice for the next X amount of time.
We are receiving quite a few comments in the chat, which is great. We don't have time for all those questions. I'm going to pick one more for you, please. It's from Johnny. Johnny's asking, what tips would you give for providing constructive feedback to members of the team who might be suffering from imposter syndrome without making things worse?
Okay, so I think one of the things that's most useful is if a line manager takes a more coaching style of managing for with the individual who may be suffering with imposter feelings. So what I mean by that is asking questions which are more searching, asking questions about what they feel they've learned, encouraging them to reflect on what did they get out of that process, what are the positives, focusing on identifying what are the strengths on the back of if you're doing let's say a quarterly review with somebody, what are the strengths that they've played to in the last quarter, what can they take from that and feed forward into the next quarter. So that idea of taking a more coaching and encouraging and discussion type of feedback, as opposed to the telling somebody what they're doing wrong. I promise you, if you just tell somebody who's suffering with imposter feelings, oh, you ought to be feeling, you should be more confident, you should just forget that, and it just doesn't work. We need, if we're suffering with imposter feelings, we need an opportunity to properly reflect, properly think through why we're reacting in such a way, but also be encouraged to think more positively. What have you learned from that? Not what went wrong. What have you learned from that about yourself? What are the strengths that you can take from that to move forward? And that coaching style of management, rather, the selling style of management rather than the telling style of management, will be much more productive for individuals who are suffering with imposter feelings, definitely.
Great. Thank you so much. I think this was the last question for today. I'll definitely remember the line that feelings are not fact. I think it's very relevant. I'd like to thank everyone who joined us, and thank you, Marie, for sharing your insight and expertise with our audience today. A reminder that if you're a member of CMI, you can log into Management Direct by using the link in the live chat and find a wide range of exclusive development resources and much more. And if you're not yet a member, you can join our community today by accessing the link that's also in the live chat and getting full access to the Management Direct portal. Thank you all again for joining us, and I wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you.